So in this video, we are going to be continuing to take a look at a scenario where civilization starts over. We are now on episode 41 of the series, and in the last episode, we saw the final build-up to the Second World War. With communism spreading all throughout the world, every single one of the countries with a red circle is a communist nation. The plan that the European communists had set in motion has been officially begun, as the European Communist Bloc, which I will be referring to throughout the course of this war as the Diamond Alliance, supported communist rebels in Gibraltar, which is a region that has been under Galician, Pyrenean and Moroccan occupation for over 100 years. It broke away. The Iberian Defensive Pact found out about this, and with them finding out about this, and their plan has been set into motion, so the Diamond Alliance officially declared war on the IDP. So let's begin the war where it started in the Iberian Peninsula. So, with Gibraltar rebelling, these guys will be quickly moving in to the rest of their occupied territory, and for the most part they will be completely liberating their country. They also invade into this Moroccan part of, this is kind of their former part of the Union, but it is still part of Morocco's country. So, unfortunately for Morocco, they are going to be dragged into this war on the side of the IDP, which is currently very outnumbered. But anyway, with this taking place, the Galicians are going to be beginning an invasion into Gibraltar. After preparing their military, because, this was very unexpected, they will be beginning to invade back into this land, and, let's just say the Purple Team isn't going to be able to do so well here. But this is kind of only a distraction that the Diamond Alliance has set up, because the main show of this war is not going to be in Gibraltar. Down in Africa, over with the French colony, the French communists, who had been planning this for a while, will begin an invasion into the Pyrenean Congo. This colony, which is one of the most loyal colonies, unlike the Pyrenean American colonies, these guys are quite stable. They will be invaded into by the French, as the French had really put a lot of troops into this part of Africa. But not only the Pyrenean Congo, they will also be beginning an invasion down into Galician South Africa. Now this is very bad for Galicia, as this colony is quite important, so losing it would be a major blow. So they begin to rapidly send over troops to help out their colonial forces fighting down here. However, the French do still manage to make pretty rapid gains. Back up north, the navies of the entire Diamond Alliance begin to bombard the northern Iberian coast. Unfortunately for Galicia and Pyrenesia, this also includes their capital, and a lot of bomber planes from the Diamond Alliance make major runs over the entire Iberian Peninsula, destroying a lot of infrastructure to these countries. Now, you might be thinking, what is the rest of the world's reaction to this war? Well, a lot of the world wants to stay out of this war. Some of the world is in support of Galicia, more specifically some of the democratic nations in the world. They don't really like the communists. But, of course, you can't forget there are also a lot of communist nations in the world. These guys, they heavily agree and support with the Diamond Alliance, and throughout the course of this war, we will be seeing multiple more communist nations getting involved. Now we need to go over to Pyrenesia, because the Swedish, the Polish and the French armies have finally finished their preparations to cross the Pyrenees Mountains. Now, when I say cross, I don't mean they're like gonna walk over the Pyrenees. Obviously, they're not gonna be doing that. They make several excursions around the coast, and this is very bad for Pyrenesia, as they get right up close to their capital, and this causes Galicia to have to send a lot of troops over to Pyrenesia. Now, luckily for Galicia and the rest of the IDP, Morocco absolutely locked in. They blasted straight into the Purple Team, and they were able to quickly capture the capital of this country. They also liberated their land, and with that taking place, a lot of this country does actually fall over. The Pyreneans also managed to take this land, and now it's kind of just this small Galician region, which quickly does fall, but that doesn't avoid the fact that Galicia is still losing on this front line up here. The IDP is heavily pushed back on the Pyrenean coast, as the Diamond Alliance forces now even cross into Valencia. Now, I am going to be colouring this in as the French colour, as that is the country on their border, but do note, this is the entire Diamond Alliance going in, which is why they are able to do so well here. A big pincer movement does take place as well, cutting off this major city, which is kind of in the Pyrenees, and this kind of makes it so Pyrenean forces have to hide out in the actual Pyrenees mountain range, which will create a very interesting front line looking something like this. But that is actually not going to be the only thing in the Diamond Alliance's plan, because on top of the fact that Sweden is picking a fight with Galicia, the second strongest country in the world, they also have another major plan. Now, that plan is of course to fully take over Europe, but it's a little bit more simple than that, as they have a few more targets that they need to sort out to complete that plan, which is European domination. As with seeing how much success they are seeing in the Iberian Peninsula, as well as a few more countries pledging to join the Diamond Alliance, which I will colour in a second, the Diamond Alliance officiates the second part of their plan, which will be the Diamond Alliance declaring war on the 3-Point Star Alliance. The 3-Point Star Alliance is the only other major roadblock in terms of dominating Europe, so the Diamond Alliance plans to get this alliance out of the way as fast as possible before they can really militarise and become a threat, because with this war starting, a lot of the world will be militarising up, and the Swedish cannot give these guys time to build up strength. So with special forces up here from Kola, Sweden will be beginning an invasion into this northern Russian area. This is kind of where Arkhangelsk and Nenetsia are. Two of these close major cities will be captured, and along with this, like I just said, more communist nations pledged to join in on the war. One of such countries is going to be Finland. The Finnish will be entering into the war, and that is the main reason why they gave the plan to invade Russia the go-ahead. As Finland quickly crosses their border, and this also comes about with them invading through their puppet state, and the Finnish get right up in the metropolitan area of Russia. Now, of course, the 3-Point Star Alliance was caught heavily off guard by this, so even the weak orange country is able to move into North Caspia, and even into Volga as well, the leader of the 3-Point Star Alliance. Back over in the Iberian Peninsula, these Pyrenean mountain forces are taken out when Swedish special forces arrive, and Pyrenesia is going to be continued to invaded into, and after a brutal battle where the Pyreneans and Galicians fight with a very large amount of honour, the Pyrenean capital will be falling over to the European communists. As well as this, the French navy, which had been building up around the Balearic Islands, will be making a landing on Minorca and Majorca, as well as this island down here, and the Balearic Islands officially comes under French control. Moving back over to Russia, a lot of these cities near the capital will be falling over to the Finnish. As well as this, now I don't know if you could call this a landing, I guess maybe they go ice skating over to this island, and they quickly make a landing on it, fully taking it over. After this, they kind of focus more on the very northern regions of Russia, and they then begin to move their front lines down. Seeing the success they are having here, another communist nation will be joining in on this war, and this is a communist nation that really doesn't like the 3-Point Star Alliance, more specifically Volga. And that is going to be this red country that was previously a part of the pink team. Now, despite the fact that these two also don't like each other, both of them have a common disdain for Volga. So the red team will be joining the war, and they begin an invasion into Volga. Now, Volga, not only with the war with the Diamond Alliance, they were also not expecting to go to war with this country, so they will be losing these two close-by major cities, and a lot of this kind of central land, as it was pretty much completely undefended. Back over in the Iberian Peninsula, the Diamond Alliance continues to see more success, and it seems to be, even for Galicia, that these guys are unstoppable. These guys, like I did say in the last episode, had been militarizing for about 2 years up to this war, that strength really shows here. At this point, even more communist nations join in on the war. This includes Turkey, and along with this, the capital of Russia is going to go ahead and be captured. We also, at this point, see Königsberg also join in on the war and start an invasion into Russia. Königsberg doesn't necessarily have anything against Russia, however, sides of this war do indicate that these guys will have to fight. A big encirclement over here takes place, and this actually captures over 200,000 Russian forces, which is absolutely devastating for the Russian army, and this basically causes some of these Russian front lines to completely collapse. Down over here, however, The Orange country, they had kind of been losing control of their front lines. However, with Turkey joining the war, that was the main reason Turkey did join, to help stabilize out this front line. It kind of leads to a bit of a stalemate happening here. But now we need to focus back on mainland or Central Europe, because a pretty interesting event is going to be taking place. Now, the Diamond Alliance isn't really going to be liking what's happening here, but they'll be going along with it anyway, as they still have confidence that they will be able to easily win this war. And that is, the Romans cross into the border of the Phoenician Union. Now, this is bad because these guys are part of this alliance. I did call this guy the Balkan Alliance, so I'll just call these guys the Balkan Alliance for simplicity. But this will actually enter the Balkan Alliance into the war, as these guys, they already didn't like the communists, and now even being invaded, now even being invaded by the communists, they will be officially joining in on this war in solidarity against the communist faction. Now, very bad thing. You might just think, oh, this was Rome doing their thing, they just wanted land, they didn't coordinate this well. Well, they did coordinate it with one country, Poland. And you know what Poland's going to do here? Boom. Within literally 5 days of these guys joining in on the war, the Polish managed to capture the capital of Carpathia. And yeah, that's very bad, because Carpathia was kind of the leader of this alliance. Now, Illyria, they were also in charge of this alliance, but they were very important to this alliance, and also with them being cut in two, it basically makes them drop out of the war. It causes the Serbians to have to occupy these guys, and that doesn't even stop them from continuing to be invaded. We also see the Austrians make an offensive down into the Phoenician Union, cutting them off from Illyria, who they also start an invasion into. And it's still just looking like the communists are absolutely dominating, even with more countries joining in on the war. Now, this does cause some communist forces to be retreated from these front lines, more specifically the Russian front line. This does allow some more troops to be conserved to fight against the Orange team. Now, Volga, as the leader of the 3-Point Star Alliance, they draw up the plan. Basically, kick out, I don't even know what to call these guys. I'm just going to call them the Orange team. Kick out the Orange team and Turkey back to the Caucasian Mountains so they can fully focus on the Russian front line, as this front line is much more important than this one. Now, of course, they definitely do need to focus a lot on this front line, which they are still being pushed back on, by the way. Königsberg is still making some more advances into Russia, but that is what their plan is there, and it will go into effect as Volga continues to move forces into this country. Now, moving back down over to Africa, I haven't really focused on this in a little while. The French will move right up to the Cape portion of the Galician colony, where a stalemate is held as Galician forces finally arrive, although still a lot of Galician forces are having to defend over here, which is kind of going decently. I mean, one major city in Iberia is recaptured. However, Valencia does lose their capital, so that's a pretty big negative. Speaking of Pyrenesia, a lot more of the Pyrenean Congo is invaded into. However, a pretty important thing to note is guerrilla warfare exists. A lot of the Pyrenean forces are well trained in the jungle environment, which is something the French forces aren't as well trained in, so we kind of just see a stalemate looking something like this, and that kind of puts a hold on the front lines in Africa, at least for now. And that is until, of course, Libya joins the war, because, they just have to get involved. The Libyans, who only just recently got involved with communism, that also caused the Square Alliance to split up, which is something Morocco isn't very happy about. They will be joining in on this war, and they will be quickly invading into the Galician colony. Now, these guys, they aren't the strongest of countries, but this is basically just desert, so they're kind of just walking into this area. And another thing to note, this is all happening at the same time, so while this was going on up here. So don't think that these front lines down here were stalemated, I just want to clear that up. Same thing up here with Libya. While this invasion is going on, there is other stuff going on throughout the world, which I will talk about in just a second. Some of that other stuff includes the capital of the Phoenician Union being captured, and the French, they also make a crossing into this border all the way up to the Alps, and with that taking place, this country is going to go ahead and surrender. Now, the Romans, they believe they're on a roll here, so instead of kind of just slowing down and not getting more countries involved with the war, they decide to do something very stupid, and that is then go after Naples. Now, at this point, Sweden is basically just going to tell these guys to chill out, because not only are they really showing the aggressiveness of the communist nations here, they are also adding more nations to fight them. However, Poland will be granting Rome a lot of forces to use to ensure that Naples is dealt with quickly, so this country will be quickly falling over. Back over in Caspia, or this Caspian region, North Caspia begins an invasion into this orange country as Volga's plan is going into effect. However, in regards to Russia, it's going very badly now. Finland and the rest of the communist guys continue an invasion into Russia, and literally every single Russian major city has been captured at this point, except for this one right on Volga's border. And Russia is only really being kept alive by the fact that Volga is just sending everything into them. Oh, there's this guy as well. You can go over to Finland, I guess. Back down south to the Balkans. With Rome's forces now being freed up, they are able to continue to advance into Illyria. And this guy is going to be just kind of slapped around. The communists are very strong. These guys are not too strong. We also see Carpathia fully falling over, as Poland now begins advances into Serbia. However, at this point, a new country is actually going to be joining in on this war, and it's actually going to be serving as a pretty big distraction for the Diamond Alliance. The Dutch will be entering the war on the side of the Galicians. Now, the Dutch, they are a very interesting country. Historically, they haven't really been too strong. They have kind of been a bullied nation. Now, this is kind of something I regret doing. They were the first nation, so I probably should have made them a bit more important. But they are looking to be important in this war, as they are basically giving one for the team. They're basically saying to Galicia and the 3-point stars, hey, we're going to cause as much chaos as possible for the Diamonds. In that time, push them back as much as you can in order to gain a big morale boost, and hopefully give you the courage you need to win the war. The Dutch quickly cross into Calais and also into northern France. Now, this is an absolute disaster for France, as they were the main force fighting in the Iberian Peninsula. This does allow Valencia to be completely freed, and a big event, the Pyrenean capital is actually going to be recaptured. Now, this only comes about due to the collapse of this front line. Well, not really collapse. It's kind of like instability. They have to rearrange this front line, and after issues up here are sorted out, this front line once again turns to a stalemate. So the Dutch, they get right up near the French capital, and they also just blast straight into Poland. Their goal is to make Poland draw as many troops away from the Balkans as possible to give these guys a fighting chance. This does allow Illyria to make a bit of a pushback. However, Serbia, that front line kind of just stays as it is. But unfortunately, all good things must come to an end, and after the Dutch forces are kind of worn out, as well as with front lines being reorganised, the Dutch come crashing down as enemy forces quickly cross into their territory. The French rapidly advance into the Dutch, as well as the Polish, and with the Polish taking over a very large portion of the Rhineland area, and the French getting right up near their capital, the Dutch will unfortunately be surrendering over. The Galicians will not be forgetting this. Now, unfortunately, the Dutch did fall relatively quickly. However, a very big thing that this did actually cause were enough troops being retreated from the Russian front lines to allow Volga to make very big advances into the Orange country. And this is absolutely huge, as, well, if they can get rid of this front line, Russia is, the Russian front line looks from something more like impossible to push back to something that they could actually stand a fighting chance of beating the communists on. Also, Volga does start to push back this country over here. However, these guys had really gone in on Siberia up to this point. They had taken about this much of the land. And after the Dutch fall, this causes Sweden to implement the next part of their plan. The Swedish, which have been heavily influencing a lot of these communist nations all throughout the world, will be making a call to the rest of the communist bloc. This will basically be them saying, hey, come and join us in this war, and if we win this war, the rest of the world will stand no chance at beating us, and communism will be the dominant ideology, and we can basically rule the world. And unsurprisingly, a lot of communist countries all throughout the world are going to be accepting this. These countries include the Central Asian Red Team, which, like I said in the last episode, they had been heavily funded by Sweden, which is why they were able to beat the Green Team. the Cambodian country, the Northern Green Korean team, as well as the big Texas country. Now, this is a pretty major helping hand to the communists, and this makes the position of the blue side even worse in this war. One thing to mention as well, the Galicians have now officially been fully kicked out of their southern African colony, and with the Libyans moving even further into part of Galicia, a very large chunk of the northern Galician colony basically just joins the Libyans. Once again, this is a colony. There were people here that aren't in support of Galicia, and it's kind of just a remote area, so it's very easy for the Libyans to control. Now, one more thing that all of these communist nations joining causes is even more of the world opinion swaying away from this kind of just being a war in Europe, like, oh, of course there's going to be a big war in Europe, to this being a very major threat of a new communist world order, and a lot of nations throughout the world start to think about joining in on this war. However, no one will be getting involved for now. Moving over to Iberia, with the communists now having that extra support that I was talking about, they are able to recapture the capital of Pyrenesia, and unfortunately, this is a very sad day, the Pyreneesians will be officially falling over to the communist forces. This also includes their colony over here in the Congo, and not only does that make a very large portion of resources fall, it also gives the French access to the Galician colony, which they then begin an invasion into. At this point, the African front is looking heavily secured for the communists, and it's not looking like too much could change that, as the Libyans and the French even managed to meet up, cutting the Galician colony in two. Over in the Balkans, the capital of Illyria will be captured, and after a lot more effort, the rest of the country will fall, and Serbia is also rapidly invaded into. Back over in the Orange country, they are still being pushed back. Volga and the Northern Caspians, they are locking in, and their plan is actually quite successful, except for the very small fact of something they didn't take into account, and that is the Turkish are extremely good at fighting in this mountainous terrain. They were hoping to use the Caucasian mountains as a natural border, so they wouldn't have to focus on this southern front line. However, this has kind of just made things even worse, as now, not only do they still have to fight on this southern front line, they have just wasted a bunch of troops getting down to here for nothing to happen, and also a lot of their troops are now being killed off by Turkish guerrilla fighters. Over in the Caribbean, Texan forces will make a landing on Cuba, quickly capturing the island. They also make a landing on Jamaica, and with the Galician Navy basically being retreated from this area because there's more important things to worry about, all of the Galician Caribbean lands will be falling over, as well as the Pyrenean Bahamas. And this also influences Florida to join in on the war as well, because to their eyes, it's like, oh yeah, we've got this in the bag. The communists are very clearly winning this war at this point. Back over in Russia, this country is going to be continuing to fall, as there isn't really too much left to hold this country up. Volga is trying as best as they can to keep this country alive. But it is at this point in the war where a pretty big event is going to be taking place that is going to be decently changing the dynamic of this war. Seeing the communist nations are now doing so well in the war, a lot of other countries are not so much liking what they are seeing, and this isn't exactly the countries you might think it is. It isn't the democratic countries, it isn't the monarchist countries, it's actually the fascist countries. The fascists are basically as far opposite to the communists as you can think, and seeing how well the communists are doing, the fascists decide to step up and help out their fellow democratic nations. Now, of course, I say fellow democratic nations. The democracies and the fascists, they also don't like each other too much. However, they put their differences aside as they understand the threat of this communist bloc. And the countries that are going to be joining in on the fascist side are going to be decently important. Now, I believe there are 4 fascist countries in the world, and 3 of the 4 will be joining in on this war. Those countries are going to be the green team down here. This is very good as it helps Russia out a lot. The pink team over here, which is great for Volga, as now they don't have to worry about this country. And finally, the Norwegian country. They don't like Sweden, and they're going to be joining this war. Oh, also, I misspoke earlier. There are not 4 fascist countries, there are 6, I think. I could be wrong, but I believe there are 6. But either way, these countries will be entering in on this war, and this is actually going to be changing the tide just a little bit. Over in Russia, with the Green Team now joining in on this war, and this is something Volga had known about, so they had stationed a lot of troops in this country. They are able to push back against Finland into some of this Russian area, taking back 2 of these major cities. And the pink team, being much stronger than the red team over here, they are able to make a very solid advance into the red country. They are actually able to capture the capital of this country, and along with some special Siberian Volgan forces, the red country is actually going to be fully captured, which I believe is the first communist country to be knocked out of the war. I could be wrong though. But that is definitely a big blow for the communists, as this guy was kind of causing some issues for Volga. Don't be fooled, however, as it's not going to be all like this for the fascist countries who have just joined. Specifically, Norway. Norway gets absolutely blasted by Sweden. Sweden is at least 10 times stronger than Norway, more than that in fact, and Norway quickly falls. However, once again, this does serve as a decent distraction. Moving back over to the Balkans, however, Serbia is officially captured, and this is very bad, as all forces that were fighting on the Balkan front line are now able to move over to other fronts. For the first time in the war, the Galician mainland is now crossed into by communist forces, and we also see Gibraltar, or what I'm going to be calling it the purple team so I don't confuse it with Galicia again, is re-established as a lot of this Gibraltar land is invaded into. Now, Morocco, they do cause some issues in the south, but for the most part, the purple team is re-established. However, at this point in the war, a very major event is going to be taking place. With the expansion of the communists will be getting themselves into a situation that won't exactly be too helpful for them. And that all comes about when the new Australian communist country will be joining in on this war. Now, the Australian communists are a very new country. They were also heavily funded by Sweden. However, up until this point, India hadn't known about this. However, with these guys joining in on the war, it becomes pretty clear to India that Sweden was trying to weaken them. Now, India doesn't like this too much, and India is going to start to think of doing something. But for now, the Australians will be joining in on this war, and like I just said, the Indians don't like that. This is kind of their sphere, and, this also does help the communist nations out just a little bit. But there is actually going to be another event that is also not too great for the communists, as well as swinging India very heavily against them. A new country will be joining in on this war, which is going to be greatly helping out the blue side. Egypt will be joining the war on the side of Galicia and the 3-Point Star Alliance. Now, Egypt, they are a constitutional monarchy at this point, meaning they are very democratically aligned, and this includes being aligned with countries like Galicia, as well as kind of Volga, although Volga is an absolute monarchy. They do have some democratic ideals, though, but they will be joining in on this war in the name of kicking the communists out of the Middle East. They absolutely smash straight into Libya, quickly capturing their capital. I'm not going to lie, Libya's going to get cooked here. They have no chance. Now, the French, they are smart enough to take control over this big chunk of the Galician colony that Libya had previously taken control of. So this doesn't really cause the communists to lose too much, although in the north they kind of do lose out on some of this land. But Egypt, within just 2 months of joining the war, manages to fully knock out the Libyans. And after that, they focus their sights on Turkey. For the first time since the Sinai Coalition of episode 10, Egyptian forces cross into the Turkish country. And the Egyptians, when I say a country is nationalist, the Egyptians, they're very nationalist. Their new king has been about restoring the old glory of Egypt, and that's a very nationalistic thing. So the Egyptians, they have a lot of resentment for Turkey. They are able to capture this major city up here, and this also allows Volga and their guys to make an advance into the Caucasian mountains. Now, Sweden isn't too happy about this event, but now with the Balkans out of the way, Sweden, they just want to get the 3-Point Star Alliance out of this so they can help out Turkey and quickly deal with Egypt. So, after sending a lot more reinforcements as well as reinforcements coming from the Americas, the Finnish are going to be slapping around Russia really badly, and they also now meet up with the Volgan border. And at this point, a very sad event happens. The Russians will be surrendering. This now allows Volga to be crossed into they were crossed into by the orange team and the red team, but now they're being crossed into directly by the European communists, which is a little bit scary for them as their capital is not too far away from the border. So with the Swedish being in such a rush to supply Turkey, they start doing some interesting things to Pink Romania. They force Pink Romania to let them move troops through them so they can ship them over to Turkey, which does allow them to make a slight pushback against Egypt. But for the most part, Egypt still does decently well here. But it is at this point in the war where a pretty big event is going to be taking place. Like I had just said, the Indians have now realised that the Swedish were funding a rebellion in their country, in their Australian colony, to directly hurt and weaken them, and this is going to be causing something pretty interesting to happen. The Indians, after continuing and completing their preparations for something they didn't really want to do ever since World War I, will be doing something pretty drastic. Wanting to ensure that their stability can be ensured and that no outside power can weaken them, the Indians will be entering the war on the side of the Galicians, and this will officially be entering the Triangle Alliance into the war, which is absolutely huge for the Galicians. This is exactly what they needed, and the communists are very angry about this. So, in regards to preparation time, basically what I meant by that was India mobilizing their military and their navy, because they are going to be doing something with their navy. The Indian forces will make a landing in northern Australia, specifically this point right over here. This is like some of the very old Indonesian colony. And they quickly expand around this front. This is something they weren't able to do when it broke away because when they were, rebelling away from India, they were directly receiving some support from Sweden, which right as of now they are not receiving as much of. The Indian Navy had also been sent through the Strait of Malacca, and they make a landing in southern Cambodia. They are able to capture one major city right here, and then they begin to snake around the coast just a little bit. Over in Central Asia, Persia sends a very nice letter to the leader of this brown country right here, basically saying, if you don't move out of our way, we're going to move you. And what that is basically Persia is asking for right of passage for their troops through the brown team so they can invade these two guys up here. Also, the green team, they're a communist nation, they joined in on the war as well. But the brown team is actually going to be refusing. Basically what they're going to be saying is, we want to stay neutral, so can you just leave us out of the war? Persia is going to respond to that by invading the capital and burning down the presidential building. Lovely. Or probably the monarch's house, because it's a monarchy. But the Persians will be rapidly advancing into this country. India had granted Persia full control and organisation over the Central Asian front, and Persia is probably strong enough to handle this. They are quickly able to cut the brown country in two, causing this portion over here to surrender, allowing them to continue to invade into this region. And after that they start an invasion into the Central Asian red team. Back over in the Iberian Peninsula, the Galicians continue to get pushed back near their capital area, but down in the south they plan to meet up with Morocco and encircle some Gibraltar troops. So the major city of the southern Gibraltar region, or in the Galician occupation zone, it is captured, and this is also causing an encirclement to take place. This allows quite a lot of troops to be captured over here, and it allows some breathing space for Galicia, as some Moroccan troops are sent up here to help Galicia make a pushback. Over here in Valencia, Valencia is pushed into in the northern regions. And over here in Eastern Europe, the green team is started to be invaded into. Back over in Volga, the communist troops get right up near their capital. In fact, they even reach the outskirts of the city. And they also begin to invade down, hoping to get back into the territory of the Orange Country. However, there isn't going to be a second front line going up into the Orange Country, as the Egyptians are continuing to absolutely blast straight into Turkey. They are able to capture two more major cities, And this is strength and capability that Egypt hasn't been able to show ever since like the Sinai Coalition all the way back in episode 10. We also see Egypt begin to push around a little bit more in the coast and kind of far reaches of Turkey over here. But it is at this point where the Swedish will no longer let this front line down here continue to go bad for them. They had previously been forcing Pink Romania to let them move forces through them so they could send them to Turkey via coast. However, that clearly isn't seeming to be enough anymore. So the Swedish and the rest of the Diamond Alliance are actually going to be invading through a country to help get to Turkey. And that country is going to be Greece. So the Greeks get a nice letter of invasion on their doorstep, basically saying, we need to move our troops to Turkey, and we're going to use you to let us move our troops through. So the Polish forces will quickly cross into the Greek Republic, and this event is actually going to have some backlash, as, taking a look at the ideologies layer, Greece is a republic, and it seems to be that the communists are going after a lot of republics. You know, they went after Carpathia, they went after the Galicians and the IDP, which are very, democratic-leaning countries. So there is actually going to be a little bit of backlash to this, like I just said, and that is actually going to be 2 new countries joining in on this war that are actually going to be pretty important. The first country to do this is Tokyo. They already don't like the fact that there's a communist country in their region, and, they plan to deal with that. But the second country is going to be joining it for a little bit of an ulterior motive, and that country is going to be Indonesia. Now, the Indonesians, they have not really done much since World War I, except for the fact that they did invade back into their homeland, where there was once a fascist Indonesian country. But the Galicians greatly helped Indonesia getting back their homeland, so as a returning favour, the Indonesians will be joining the war on the side of the Galicians in hopes of helping them defeat the communist nations of the world. This is a very big help for the Indians, as this allows them to absolutely storm through the rest of Cambodia. And the Indians give management of the Australian front line over to Indonesia, where actually a lot of people in the northern regions, they are not so in support of the communist government, where they are more in support of Indonesia. So we actually see a lot of people rebelling away from the communist government to join the Indonesian cause. After a little bit of convincing, we also see the purple Australian country join in the war to start an invasion of the French Australian colony. These guys are a communist nation, and the rest of Australia doesn't really like that. Also, they are a colonialist country, which is another reason not to like them. But the purple Australians will do pretty well here. Back up north with Tokyo, which I think I accidentally called Japan earlier, but no, this is Tokyo. Tokyo will make a landing in the northern green country, and, this country isn't going to last too long. They weren't really expecting to have to fight a war, so they had kind of sent out all of their forces as volunteers to help out the Diamond Alliance in Europe. Over in the Americas, the Texans get the order from Sweden to invade into the fascist Louisianan country, and these guys are quickly defeated. And seeing invasions in the Americas, there is actually going to be a country that is starting to kind of think about joining in on this war, but we will not see that at the moment. Over in the African continent, we see the Indians start an invasion into the French colony. They also move into the Galician colony as well, and after their superior colonial army fully takes it over, they grant control of this guy back over to the Galicians. After this, the Indian forces then march up north into the actual French colony, and we also see something that I forgot to do in the last episode, and that is the Moroccans will be invading into the French colony, and after these 2 front lines meet up, the French colony will be officially falling over to the Indians. This also allows some of the Galician colonial forces to make a pushback, and the Galicians, they have really been working their colonies quite hard, so they make a pledge to this ginormous colony, basically saying if they are successful in the war, they will be much more willing to grant a lot of this colony independence, and this makes a lot of the native African forces much more willing to fight, and this allows them to start an invasion into the Pyrenean Congo. Back over in Europe, however, the communists are still seeing a lot of success. It's not just all downhill for the communists. the Turkish managed to quickly cross the border into Greece, fully taking their Anatolian land, and with the Polish managing to capture the Greek capital, supply routes connecting to Turkey are established, and this causes Egypt to be pushed back pretty heavily. Well, that is until the Caucasians join in on the war. The Caucasians really don't want to be, forced into this new communist world order. They are a fairly democratic nation. Now, like I just showed there, they are an absolute monarchy, but they are starting to introduce aspects of constitutional monarchy. So, now being able to actually cross the border into Turkey, before it had been stopped at the Caucasus Mountains, we are now able to see another country invade into the Turkish, which, after being pushed back, allows the Egyptians to make some gains again. At this point, the English will also be joining in on this war. They kind of just want to pledge their support to the Galicians and free Europe from the communist clutches that they are in at the minute. Speaking of the communist clutches, this green country over here fully falls over to the communist forces, and the capital of Volga is unfortunately captured. Back over in Central Asia, we see the rest of the brown team fall, and the communists, they begin to get pushed back once again. Over in the Southeast Asian region, we see Vietnam joins in on the war. Their main aim for doing this is to get Cambodia back. Cambodia used to be a part of them, and now they see an option to gain that land back, and they will be taking that option as they invade into their southern neighbours, and after that, this country will quickly fall over. We also see at this point the Koreans enter into this war. Basically, how they do this is Tokyo promises Korea that they will split this land up here with them if they join in on the war and help the democratic forces out. And the Koreans will be agreeing to this, officially joining the war. However, at this point, a new event is going to be taking place that will be heavily affecting this war and could even spell complete defeat for one of the sides. In Florida, it's a regular day, they're sending some ships out to go and supply the European communists. Everything is looking normal until a pretty major event does take place. On this port city right here, this is a pretty major port city, it's just a regular morning, but all of a sudden, hundreds of bomber planes approach this city and begin to destroy all of the ports and all of the infrastructure of the military bases in this city. These planes are then quickly followed by a bunch of ships that begin to bombard the Floridian coast, and it doesn't take too long to identify what country this is from. And that country that has just entered into the war is going to be none other than the United States of Brazil. The USB, seeing the chaos going on in the world, was thinking of staying out of this war, but seeing how this war has quickly reached lands near them, with the communist nations invading into this country that was neutral in the war, they don't like the fact that this aggressiveness is being shown. We have seen in the previous episodes that the USB has been invading into other South American nations in order to get rid of their dictatorship regimes and replace them with democratic regimes. So the USB will be joining the war on the side of Galicia in order to kick the communists out of America. The USB's forces will quickly land in Florida. I'm going to make the colour really light, otherwise you won't really be able to see, but these forces quickly do launch up. But it's not actually only going to be the USB joining in on this war, it's actually going to be every single member of their economical alliance. These guys are all very friendly with the USB, and they pledge their allegiance to helping this cause. Back over in Florida with the USB ramping up invasion forces, the Floridian capital is quickly captured, and after this the coast is invaded onto. Just removing the alliance layer for a second. This city over here is captured, as well as this one, as the Floridian nation is cut in two, and the USB begins to advance towards Louisiana. Louisianan forces which had previously been put down rise up once again, and the country breaks away from Texan occupation, and these guys will quickly meet up with the USB. Now, one thing to note, these guys, they are fascist. Now, the USB, they don't like fascism just as much as communism, but they are willing to work with these guys, as from what they've seen, the fascists aren't the one trying to take over the world here, so that's a decent reason for them to do so. Although I'm sure a lot of their people wouldn't really be happy about this event, so we could see the USB maybe doing something here. But not right now, as the USB is now fully focused on taking out Florida. The entire nation falls over, and after that the USB will fully focus on Texas, who, after getting blitzed around the coast and losing two major cities, and with their capital being approached, the Texans will be surrendering over to the USB, and that will be officially ending the communists in the Americas. With this event taking place, the USB now starts to ship troops out over to Galicia, which heavily allows some breathing space as they are able to fully push the communists out of their country and even start a small invasion into Pyrenesia. Over in Australia, the front lines continue to go even worse for the communists, as the French are officially kicked out of Oceania. This also comes along with them losing control of all of these islands, and the Indonesians finish their invasion of this communist Australian country right over here. This officially ends the Oceanian and South Asian front lines, so all of these forces can now be shipped over to Europe. Over in Central Asia, the Persians continue to see even more success as they are able to capture two more major cities, and at this point a new country is also going to be joining in on the war on their own side, and that's going to be the anarchists. The anarchists kind of just want to go in and just take some land and do some destruction, so they'll be doing just that, and they are actually able to capture the communist country's capital. Over in the green team, we see a coup taking place. This country had only recently become communist, and they only did so because they were invaded by the red team, and their government was replaced by a communist one, which the people weren't exactly a big fan of, so the people rise up and overthrow the communist government and establish this country as a democracy. These guys will then proceed to invade into the communist nation, who, after losing their final major city, is going to go ahead and surrender. And it is at this point where the communist nations have officially been kicked all the way back over to Europe. Now, the Swedish don't really like the sound of this. However, the Swedish do believe that if they can maintain full control over the European continent, they will be able to peace out of this war and keep their land claims. So to do this, they start invading a bunch of neutral European countries. They quickly invade into Denmark, and now the reason they are doing stuff like this is to, like I just said, gain full dominance over the continent. The Polish will invade into this Danzig country. The Finnish will quickly cross the border into the Estonian country, capturing the capital, and this nation will for the most part fall over, except for some guerrilla fighters. We also see the Polish continuing to advance down into Greece. Now, Sweden going around and invading neutral countries is not something that a lot of nations are very fond of, so the USB is actually going to be influencing even more American countries to join in on this war. These three countries over here that were formerly part of Indonesia, they still have some ties to Indonesia, so they will be joining in on this war. We also see this turquoise country join, as well as the yellow country over here. But with this happening, many troops are shipped over here to the Iberian Peninsula. And slowly but surely, the Galicians are starting to heavily push back, and they even manage to capture the capital of Pyrenesia. They also do pretty decently with invading into Gibraltar, and unfortunately prior to this, Valencia had fully been occupied and surrendered, so Morocco has to go up and invade into them. And they also invade into the rest of this Pyrenean area over here. However, a pretty big issue is met. Once the forces over here reach up with the Pyrenean mountains, they really struggle to get past. The communists had heavily defended these front lines, so they have to think up of maybe making a landing somewhere. Now, one of the options that they do have is sending even more troops over to Egypt, which they do. It allows them to push even further back into Turkey. But once all of the Anatolian Peninsula falls over, they meet the same kind of issue, which is they can't really get into mainland Europe. At this point, also the rest of Greece has fallen, so that isn't really an option either. And the Swedish make a very heavy coastal blockade. Now, there are quite a few spots where a landing could be made, but there is one spot that seems to be probably the least defended region, or it's not the least defended, but it's definitely a lot less defended than some of the other regions. It's also home to people who, if seeing success on the blue team's side, they would probably rebel away from the occupation of the communists. That place is none other than the Dutch. So after a few months of preparation, hundreds of thousands of troops are set out to land in the northern Netherlands. They quickly make a landing right here, and move around, taking these two major cities. And the rest of the communists quickly rush as many troops as possible over to stop this front line from expanding. However, at this point, there is over 1 million forces already landed here, and this front line seems to be unstoppable, as they quickly move down into southern parts of the Dutch and manage to capture quite a lot of the rural area. We also see a landing made in southern Naples as the Italian peninsula is marched upon, and the capital of Rome quickly falls, and it's quickly looking like there might be a few too many fronts for the communists to handle. Over here, with a lot of more support coming from India and the rest of the Asian nations, Volga is able to recapture their capital, and they fully kick the communist forces out of their country, and after that they start a liberation campaign into Russia. We also see the Green Team invaded into. Now, unfortunately for the Green Team, their government has just been completely destroyed. The Swedish have done some not very nice things to the occupied country's governments. So with this country being restored, it will be restored as a democratic country, so that's pretty good actually. But still, some of these front lines do seem to be slow to move, and over here there is still a stalemate being held around Greece. Back over in the Dutch landing, they now focus all their efforts on areas close to Denmark, and also invade into the Polish occupation territory, because at this point, the Polish, they have kind of been spread thin. They have to occupy a lot of land, and something has just happened that is going to make it very hard for Poland to continue to fight in this war. The Pink Romanians, along with the Ukrainian country, will be jointly entering into the war on the side of the Galicians. These guys are seeing the fate of the war now start to turn around, and they hope to be able to help out who they believe will be the winning side. The Pink Romanians quickly cross into Greece, and this actually allows Egypt to make a landing, encircling some Polish forces right here, and it isn't even too long before the capital of Greece is liberated. We also see some rebellious Greek forces over here meet up with these guys, encircling a very large portion of Polish troops down here, which are then captured. And shortly after this, all of Greece is liberated, and these forces start to move up north into Serbia. Pink Romania quickly moves into the country, and they are able to capture the capital, liberating said country, as well as this, Illyria is invaded into, and their capital is liberated. And the Ukrainians' frontline assignment is to push north into Russia, as well as into Carpathia, which is exactly what they do, as another capital under the occupation of the communists falls. And once the invaded territory by the communists is liberated, the blue side begins to discover some pretty horrible things. The Diamond Alliance was committing a bunch of atrocities in these countries. Basically, they were letting their troops just go wild and do whatever they want. Civilians were killed and mass graves were discovered, and it's truly a horrific sight to see. And this sways the world even more in favour of going against the communists. And at this point, a joint kind of declaration will be sent out to the rest of the world. And this declaration is sent out from the USB, India, Indonesia, and Galicia, and it basically says to the rest of the world, if your country joins the war before the 17th of May 1937, you will be granted access into a new global world organization that will ensure that peace is kept through the rest of the world. And they reveal that this has actually been in plans for quite a while, in fact ever since the USB joined the war. And this new organization is presented, and it is named as the Council of Nations. It's kind of like the UN, it's very similar to the UN. And the people who are sending out this declaration promise that it will help prevent another global war such as this, and they will also help solve disputes between countries, and hopefully save a lot of lives. And this is actually going to be convincing a lot of countries to declare war on Sweden. The declaration is, like I just said, if they declare war on Sweden before the 17th of May, and a bunch of countries are going to be doing this. These countries include the blue team down here, the Central American country, the purple team right over here, all of the remainder of these North American nations, except for the New England country, will be accepting this proposition. We also see a few of the South American countries joined, and by a few I mean this one down here. The 3 members of the East African Economical Alliance will be joining, as well as the Congo country. The 2 Oceanian countries over here will be joining. Burma joins. South China The Philippine Island country and Taiwan join. China joins, which is very notable. They are quite big fans of Galicia at this point, so they join the war to help out. Beijing joins, and I'm not just going to keep saying all of the countries' names, I will just do a transition really quickly. So this is the countries that are so far in the war, and this is what it's looking like after. Basically, a bunch more Asian countries just join. Now, notably, at this point, every single fascist country in the world is also in this, so it's very interesting to see the democratic countries of the world collaborate with the fascist countries like that. But of course, the fascist countries are going to want to take an opportunity to defeat the communists. And with just the stupid amount of countries now in the war, like taking off the alliance layer, yeah, the red team is not looking too hot anymore. The Balkan front lines continue to go very badly. This is in fact the worst front line in terms for the communists, as all of Illyria is restored and Rome falls, allowing for the restoration of the Phoenician Union. It's also at this point where the Dutch landing is not the only landing in Northern Europe, as the English managed to make a landing in Brittany, and the French forces, which had still not really sided with this new communist government, more specifically in their capital area, will break away and join the side of the democratic nations. And this actually leads to the complete fall of France. The next target on the list is Austria, as Illyrian forces quickly move up and take over the country, and now they are on the border of Poland, which was the first communist nation in Europe, and Poland is taking quite a lot of the blame for this actually. The Polish are quickly blitzed into, and Denmark is also invaded up, as the Swedish forces brutally fight up the peninsula, hoping to keep control of this region. It's also at this point where forces had been retreated pretty heavily from Russia, allowing the Russian capital to be recaptured. And quickly after this, all of Russia is liberated. We also see Kola fall after a lot of their land is taken. Now, I'm not really too sure if these guys would have even been fighting much. Most of their forces would have been supplied from Sweden. But still, that is a pretty big event to see there. We also see the Baltic country and the Finnish puppet state is invaded into. And on top of this, Königsberg completely just nopes out of this war, and they kind of switch sides, which is pretty interesting to see, as their communist government is overthrown, and they begin a surprise invasion into Poland, which completely catches the Polish off guard, and allows the Polish capital to officially fall. With this, the rest of the Polish forces will fall over, and the Polish country will be surrendering. With the rest of their puppet state falling, as well as even some of their territory being invaded into, the Finnish are going to go ahead and nope out of this war, and now it's just Sweden left, fighting pretty much the entire rest of the world. At this point, the Swedish have completely militarized their population, but it proves to not be enough, as the Swedish heartland is now crossed into. As well as this, Lapland joins in on the war and begins an invasion into northern Sweden. And after months of brutal fighting, with the Norwegians also being liberated, and then they start an invasion into Sweden as well. On the 12th of June 1938, after a battle that has lasted 2 months, the capital of Sweden officially falls over. And with that, the Swedish will be surrendering, and that will be officially putting an end to the Second World War. So, with that war being over, it was absolutely the most destructive and the largest war in the entire history of this WICSO. It will be completely reshaping a lot of the globe as well. Yeah, without further ado, let's take a look at this absolutely monumental peace treaty. So, I think this is everything for the peace treaty. Now, there is a lot to go over here, so I do apologise if I miss anything, but let's start over in the Americas. I am going to keep the ideologies layer up the entire time I'm going over this as well. So, in South America, we don't see any changes. I don't believe so, at least. But in North America, we can see that Florida and Texas have been given new democratic governments, and we also see a new country right here. I might call this country Oklahoma. I'm not too sure if this is where Oklahoma is. It's kind of like in the region, so I will call this country Oklahoma. We also saw that Louisiana grew just a little bit. Polynesia and Galicia get their colonies back in the Americas, although I'm not too sure how long the Caribbean regions will stay under their control. Now, moving over to Africa, we actually see quite a few interesting things happen here. First of all, the entirety of the French African colonies are given independence. We see two new countries down here. We see the yellow and red countries, and we see a purple and a kind of orangey red country up here, and all of these are democratic. This country is actually a full democracy, so that's pretty good there. Over in Oceania, we see quite a few changes happen. First of all, Indonesia gets some of their Pacific islands back, these three island chains over here. We also see the Papua New Guinea country getting this chain. I think this is the Solomon Islands. The communist Australian country is given a new democratic government, and the rest of the French colony down here is given a new country, and also the purple Australian country got a little bit of land. Moving over to Southeast Asia now, we actually see quite a few pretty interesting changes here. First of all, you might notice India's puppet state is released. They were actually inclined to do this in the peace treaty. It's kind of like a thing when you join the Council of Nations that you probably shouldn't have puppet states. India decided to follow it because they are a leading member, which I will talk about more in a second. Bangladesh, though, they took a bit of a different approach. They just, swallowed their puppet states. Down here, Vietnam got some land out of Cambodia, but Cambodia does still exist. They have a new democratic government. Over in this green country, we can see that they have been split up. Korea got a bit of land, Tokyo got a bit of land, and now they are very small, and I'm sure they won't be harassed by their northern neighbour. Over in Central Asia, we can see quite a few changes. First of all, the brown team doesn't lose any land. They actually gain some land. The Persians decided in the peace treaty to give the land from the red country to them that they took. And all of the other countries also got some land from the red team, including the anarchists. I think the grey team up here might have got a few of these northern provinces, and the green team got some land as well. Now, we're going to move over to Europe and North Africa, as well as kind of the Middle East, because there were a lot of changes here, and this is definitely the bulk of the peace treaty, and Europe is pretty reshaped after this war, actually. First of all, Egypt is back. Well, once again, not really back, but Egypt is now once again a pretty strong regional power. I will do the power rankings at the beginning of the next episode, as well as some other stuff with alliances and such. But Egypt gained some land. They gained some land out of Turkey and from Libya. The Greeks and Caucasians also gained some Turkish land. This guy up here loses land to all of their neighbours. And for the main part of Europe, we can see that communism has been eradicated. Oh, also, the pink team, they got the red team in the peace treaty, and Volga got a province, I think. So, let's start off in the Iberian Peninsula. So, surprisingly, we can actually see that Gibraltar has been released. Galicia decided that to avoid further issues for independence in the future, they would just get rid of them. So, Gibraltar is finally officially a country back on this map. Pyrenesia got some land out of France. They now look very thick. Speaking of France, they lose land to, once again, Pyrenesia. The Phoenician Union and the Dutch also gain land. We'll talk about the Dutch in a second. Rome is finally gone. This is a country that's been here since episode 1, I believe, but they have now officially been wiped off the map. They were split up between the Phoenician Union and Naples. Illyria got some land out of Poland and Austria. Carpathia got some land out of Poland, and they also got one of the occupation zones, which I will talk about in just a second. Russia got some land out of Finland, the Finnish puppet, and they also took Kola's Russian part. The Baltic country got a little bit of land out of Finland, and the Danish expanded pretty heavily. But now we need to talk about the occupation zones. So the two countries that have been occupied and split up by these occupation zones are Sweden and Poland. These guys are seen as the main reason behind this war happening, so they want to ensure that no radicalism can re-sprout up in these countries. Poland is jointly occupied by 5 countries. With Poland it's a bit different to Sweden. Poland is occupied by the countries bordering them, so the Dutch get an occupation zone, the Danish do, Danzig gets an occupation zone, Carpathia gets an occupation zone, as well as Illyria. However, with Sweden it's a little bit different. These occupation zones are given, instead of nearby countries, to more kind of powerful countries. So first of all, Egypt gets a very large portion. This is kind of in the southern regions. I'm not too sure why they decided to give Egypt the southern part, but one thing to note, the capital city is actually jointly occupied by the Council of Nations, same thing with the Polish capital as well, so the Egyptians don't actually occupy the capital. The Galicians get a small claim up here. Galicia is very much focused on rebuilding after this war, as a lot of their lands were destroyed. Their Caribbean colonies, a big chunk of their African colony, and a lot of their mainland was destroyed, so they are really focused on rebuilding. The Indians get a colony in this central area, and the USB gets a colony in the north. And I think that is it for actual changes on the map, but now we need to look at the big thing, and that is the Council of Nations. So, this is the map layer for the Council of Nations. Now, there is quite a lot to go over here, and so I already know this is kind of long, but this is a part of the peace treaty, so I just want to say it in this episode. There are three, tiers. There are three tiers to the Council of Nations. The base tier is the Assembly Council members. These are the countries you see with a white circle. This makes up the majority of the Council of Nations. This is just the members that are in the Council. They get to vote on things and issues, and they have protection, which we'll talk about that more in a few episodes of what I mean by protection. But these are basically just the base members in the Council of Nations. The second tier is the regional council members. These are countries that are assigned to kind of keep control of their region. Now, the reason that this is a thing is because, unlike the UN in real life, there is no United Council of Nations army that can be used to solve disputes and wars. So what the Council of Nations relies on is these regional members that are shown with a triangle shape to sort out wars and issues in their region. The Council of Nations picks strong members in each region, so these members include Southern Argentina, California, the turquoise country up here, the Dutch are a regional council member, Morocco, Indonesia, China, Volga, and quite interestingly, Baikal. So those are the regional council members, and the final tier are the leading council members. The leading council members are kind of the countries that really get to vote on big issues. So if something is passed in the Assembly Council members, the Assembly Council members also includes the triangles. The triangle shape for the regional council members, they do not have any extra voting power than the rest of the Assembly Council members. So if a vote gains a majority in the Assembly Council members, so more than half of the white circles you see, if they vote for something, then that then goes up to the leading council members, which there are 5 members of: the United States of Brazil, the Galicians, Egypt, India, and Tokyo. These are strategically placed all throughout the world, and they are also countries that have quite a bit of importance. And there are 5 members so that no votes can end in a tie. That is exactly the reason why they added Tokyo, because otherwise it would have just been the USB, Galicia, Egypt, and India, which could have led to ties, which wouldn't have been a very good thing. But if a vote in the leading council members gets 3 out of the 5 votes, it will be passed, but if it doesn't, if say 1 or 2 countries vote for it and the other 3 don't, then it will not be passed. So the leading council members need majority to pass a legislation. But that is very basic to how the Council of Nations works. There are also human rights documents adopted with the Council of Nations. Now this is obviously because of the stuff that the communists were doing in Europe during the war. But it's very similar to the UN. There are a lot of branches of the UN that are also in the Council of Nations. And that is all I will talk about with it today, and that is all I will talk about in this video. So, if you did enjoy this video, and if you enjoyed World War II as a whole, please make sure to like and subscribe. I really hope you guys did like it, and I will see you in the next video, which will be the start of a brand new era.